Aunt Patricia and Cousin Madison swirled their champagne inside the gilded club-level lounge of the Sovereign. Madison sneered. Can't even afford a house. I didn't know people our age still rented. I took a slow sip of water, surveying the Chicago penthouse my family leached off of. My fury had long ago calcified into cold strategy. I smiled. I own the building you all live in. The room went dead silent. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Letting them recover wasn't part of the acquisition plan. I set down my glass, reached into my leather tote bag, and pulled out my tablet. With 3 precise taps, I bypassed the lounge's security network and mirrored my screen to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace. The screen blinked, transitioning from a loop of abstract digital art to a high-resolution scan of a municipal deed transfer. It wasn't just any document. It was the official, notarized transfer of ownership for the Sovereign, Chicago's most exclusive residential high-rise, and sitting right at the top, printed in bold, undeniable ink, was the name of my private equity firm. The same firm they thought was just a mid-level management company I slaved away for. Brandon leaned forward, his golden boy smirk dissolving into a mask of pure confusion. He blinked, reading the text over and over as if the words might magically rearrange themselves. Lauren, what is this? Is this some kind of IT joke? Did you hack the display? It is not a joke, Brandon, I said, my voice steady and completely stripped of emotion. It is a receipt. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. This wasn't a family squabble over dinner. It was an asset reclamation. I swiped across my tablet, bringing up the master administrative dashboard for the entire building. The Sovereign was a fully integrated smart property, and as the new majority owner, I held the master override. You see, I continued, looking directly at Madison, whose grip on her champagne flute was turning her knuckles white. When you own the building, you also control the amenities. And my compassion for this family has been a luxury you have all overdrafted for decades. Your account is empty. The free ride ends right now. I tapped the touchscreen. Above us, the gilded chandelier flickered for a fraction of a second as the system rebooted. Down the hall, the heavy mahogany doors of the private wine cellar emitted a sharp, electronic beep. The indicator light shifted from green to red. A second beep echoed from the private elevator bank. What did you just do? Patricia demanded, her voice shrill, the condescension finally cracking to reveal pure panic. I just revoked your VIP keycard access, I stated, locking eyes with her. Your fobs will no longer work for the private penthouse elevators. You are locked out of the wine cellar. You are permanently barred from the rooftop pool, the wellness center, and the club-level lounge we are currently standing in. Brendan shot up from his leather chair. You cannot do that. We live in the penthouse suites. We have a generational trust. You cannot just lock us out of our own home. Watch me, I replied, my tone clinical. You do not own the penthouse. You have been occupying it rent-free. You are no longer royalty here. You are just unauthorized tenants with revoked privileges. I searched myself, trying to summon a trace of daughterly guilt, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a familial rupture. It was a foreclosure, and they were finally in the red. Patricia's hand trembled so violently her champagne spilled onto the Persian rug. Brandon's face lost its arrogant flush, replaced by the pale realization of a terrible investment. My father, Jeffrey, sat paralyzed at the center of the lounge, staring at me as if a ghost had just walked in. Empathy is a depreciating asset. I had completely liquidated mine regarding these people years ago. For decades, I was the designated failure of this family. I was the bad investment, the black sheep who did not fit into their pristine country club aesthetic. While my father treated the generational trust like an open tab for my cousins, I was left to fend for myself. Brendan received a massive allowance to fund his endless entrepreneurial phases. Madison had her entire influencer lifestyle subsidized by family money. And I was the punchline at every holiday dinner, the cautionary tale of what happens when you lack ambition. To them, my life was a low-yield portfolio. They did not factor in the cramped, drafty, walk-up apartment where I spent my 20s. The 80-hour work weeks, fueled by bitter, burnt coffee and sheer, unadulterated grit, were invisible to their country club sensibilities. While they were busy sipping imported wine and boasting about luxury vacations, I was analyzing market trends, securing commercial loans, and quietly acquiring property after property. Over 10 years, I meticulously built a $2,160,000,000 real estate portfolio from the ground up. For years, they mistook my silence for submission. At every annual family wealth conference, I sat at the edge of the room, listening to them belittle my wardrobe, my modest car, and my career. They probably thought I was weak because I never defended myself, because I just took the abuse and smiled. But my silence was never weakness. It was armor. It was a highly calculated survival strategy. I realized early on that arguing with narcissists is a terrible investment. It yields zero returns and completely drains your emotional capital. If I had shown them my ambition, if I had revealed even a fraction of my success, they would have found a way to exploit it, claim credit for it, or poison it. So, I wrapped myself in the invisible chains of the survivor. I channeled every insult, every condescending smirk, and every deliberate exclusion into a quiet, relentless drive. I built my empire in the absolute dark, specifically to protect my assets from their toxic greed. My father finally cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence in the lounge. He puffed out his chest, instinctively attempting to project the authority he had wielded over me since childhood. He did not realize that his authority was just another bankrupt currency. "Lauren, this is a pathetic stunt," Patricia scoffed, adjusting her posture to regain her composure. "A hacked document on a screen means absolutely nothing. You have always been desperate for our attention." Brandon crossed his arms, leaning back against the leather sofa. "Exactly. Stop playing IT games, Lauren. You do not have the capital to buy a parking spot in this zip code, let alone the Sovereign." Instead of demonstrating an ounce of remorse or fear, their arrogance simply kicked into a higher gear. They were so completely insulated by their own entitlement that they could not even process a shift in the market. My father, desperate to reassert his authority, clapped his hands together. "Enough of this nonsense," Jeffrey announced, dismissing me as if I were a minor clerical error. "Let us bring the family wealth conference back to order. We have actual business to attend to." I did not interrupt. I simply stood by the marble fireplace and watched them dig their own graves. As we were discussing, Patricia continued smoothing the front of her dress. "We need to finalize the development of the private wellness center. The space issue must be resolved today." "It is already resolved," Brandon declared with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We evict the lower-income tenants on floors 2 through 10. Those working-class families bring down our property value anyway. We issue 30-day notices tomorrow and clear them out by the end of the month." I stared at them, calculating the absolute moral bankruptcy of the people in this room. Floors 2 through 10 were occupied by families who had lived in this building for decades, long before the upper levels were remodeled for the ultra-wealthy. Mass evicting them without proper cause or legal compensation was a blatant violation of federal housing laws. "Are we all in favor?" Jeffrey asked, raising his champagne glass. "Aye," the room echoed in unison. A unanimous family vote to illegally uproot dozens of lives, solely to build an indoor golf simulator and a private spa. Madison giggled, her eyes gleaming with malice, as she looked over at me. "Well, Lauren, since you claim to love those shabby little apartments so much, maybe you can join them on the street when we throw them out. I am sure you will fit right in." I let her laughter ring out through the lounge. Any microscopic, residual trace of familial guilt I might have harbored was instantly liquidated. They were not just obnoxious and vain, they were actively malicious. They viewed human lives as disposable liabilities. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they held the power to destroy communities with a simple vote over afternoon drinks. They did not know that my silence was not a surrender. It was the calm before the audit. The laughter died as I unzipped the secondary compartment of my tote bag. I didn't raise my voice to stop their little vote. I let the physical weight of reality do the talking. I pulled out 3 thick black forensic audit binders and dropped them onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed through the lounge, rattling Patricia's champagne glass. "This meeting is adjourned," I stated, resting my hands on the leather-bound covers, "and your eviction plan is denied. We are moving on to the compliance portion of today's agenda." My father frowned, his bluster returning. "Lauren, what on earth is this? You do not have the authority to—" I have the forensic accounting, I interrupted, my tone slicing through his sentence. "As the new owner of the Sovereign, I ordered a comprehensive third-party audit of the building's financial history over the last 10 years. The results were highly irregular. Or, to use the exact legal term, criminally fraudulent." I flipped open the first binder, sliding a stack of highlighted bank statements toward Brandon. He flinched as if the paper might burn him. "Let us start with you," Brandon, I said, reading directly from the executive summary. Last year, you authorized the withdrawal of $2,400,000 from the building's capital reserve. You classified the transaction as emergency structural renovations for the lower parking garage. However, the wire transfers were routed through a shell company in Delaware and deposited directly into the purchase of a private yacht currently docked in Miami. Brandon's face lost all its color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at my father, who was staring at the documents in mounting horror. I closed the first binder and opened the second, pivoting my attention to my cousin, Madison. You have been treating the Homeowners Association operating account as your personal styling budget. Over the past 24 months, you billed $150,000 in luxury handbags, designer apparel, and influencer trips to Milan. You categorize these expenses under routine building, maintenance, and lobby decor. Madison shrank back into the sofa, her perfectly contoured face contorting in panic. That was just marketing for the building, she stammered. It was promotional. It was embezzlement, I corrected her. You stole from the maintenance fund of a residential property. I looked around the table. The temperature in the room had plummeted. The smug, aristocratic air had completely evaporated, replaced by the suffocating, heavy dread of people who knew they were trapped. This was no longer a petty family drama over afternoon drinks. It was a corporate takedown. You all thought you were so untouchable, I said, my voice dangerously even. But you left a digital paper trail a mile long. Every inflated invoice, every diverted fund, and every falsified receipt has been documented, verified, and cross-referenced by a team of federal-level auditors. Patricia touched her throat, her breathing shallow. You would not do this. We are your family. You would not ruin us. This is not a family dinner, Patricia, I replied. This is an asset recovery operation, and I am simply protecting my investment. Panic finally set in, thick and suffocating. My father, desperate to salvage the last scraps of his shattered ego, stood up. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use our family's historical wealth as a physical shield against the forensic reality sitting on the mahogany table. Name your price, Lauren, Jeffrey demanded, his voice shaking but straining for authority. The generational trust will simply buy you out. We will pay whatever arbitrary fines you think are owed, and we will be done with this nonsense. I smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the absolute zero of a closed account. There is no generational trust, Dad, I said. He froze. The entire room stopped breathing. The trust went completely bankrupt 5 years ago, I explained, my words falling like the final strokes of a gavel. You all bled it dry. The Jackson Hole ranches, the Mediterranean vacations, the designer wardrobes. You spent money that no longer existed. For the last half-decade, you have been surviving on a complex web of fraudulent commercial bank loans, using this residential building as your personal collateral. I leaned forward, making sure they absorbed every single syllable. That shabby rental you mocked me for living in, that was the registered corporate headquarters of my equity firm. I did not just buy the Sovereign out from under you. I bought your defaulted debt directly from the bank. I am not just your new landlord. I am your sole, absolute creditor, and you are currently facing federal charges for wire fraud. I watched the exact moment their psychological infrastructure collapsed. It was a fascinating study in human frailty. Their entire existence, their fundamental sense of superiority, was entirely dependent on the illusion of a full wallet. They believed their access to private elevators and expensive champagne made them inherently better people, but the difference between having and being is absolute. They had stolen money, but inside, they were entirely hollow. Strip away the fraudulent capital, and there was no resilience, no character, and no intellect left to catch them. Without their stolen wealth, they instantly crumbled into empty, terrified shells. Patricia began hyperventilating, clutching her throat as if the oxygen had been surgically removed from the room. Brandon, the arrogant golden boy who had just gleefully voted to throw working-class families onto the street, physically crumpled. He leaned across the table, his previous bravado completely liquidated. Lauren, please, Brandon begged, his voice a pathetic whine. We can work this out. Give me a family discount. I will sell the yacht tomorrow. I will pay you back. Jeffrey reached out, his hands visibly trembling as they hovered over the audit binders. Lauren, have mercy. You cannot do this to us. We are your blood. I looked at the people who had humiliated me for 35 years. I searched for a drop of sympathy, but the well was completely dry. I reached into my briefcase one last time and slid a neatly stacked pile of 30-day eviction notices and asset seizure forms across the table. I am not your blood, I said. I am your landlord. And rent is due. The aftermath was as swift as it was absolute. 30 days later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, looking down at the Chicago streets below. From this height, the city looked perfectly peaceful. Down in the marble lobby, a very different scene was playing out. I watched the security feeds on my tablet as Patricia, Jeffrey, Brandon, and Madison dragged their own heavy designer suitcases toward the revolving doors. There were no porters to assist them. Their exclusive privileges were permanently revoked. They were leaving the Sovereign not as local royalty, but as evicted tenants facing multiple federal investigations for wire fraud and embezzlement. Their fake wealth had been entirely repossessed. As the heavy glass doors spun, pushing them out onto the cold pavement, I took a deep breath. For the first time in 35 years, my chest did not feel tight. The suffocating weight of their constant mockery, the decades of being treated as an invisible disappointment, simply evaporated. It was finally quiet. But simply kicking them out was not the end of this transaction. Punitive revenge is satisfying for a brief moment, but it does not build anything, it only destroys. If I simply took their luxurious space and lived in it, I would just be inheriting their toxic legacy. True justice, the kind of justice that actually endures, is constructive. It is the justice of the sower. The ultimate revenge is not just dismantling your abuser's empire. It is using the bricks of their ruined kingdom to build a better world that they are no longer allowed to enter. I walked over to the mahogany table, the exact spot where they had gleefully voted to ruin the lives of the working-class families on the lower floors. My attorney had left a stack of legal directives waiting for my signature. I picked up my pen. With a few decisive strokes, I officially finalized the rezoning of the Sovereign. I was not building a private wellness center or an indoor golf simulator. Instead, I authorized the complete conversion of the top 3 penthouse suites. The gilded club-level lounge, the private wine cellars, and the massive luxury units were being gutted and repurposed into premium, subsidized, affordable housing. The families on floors 2 through 10, the very people my cousins had called disposable, were receiving permanent rent-controlled leases and full access to the rooftop amenities. I was turning the site of my family's supreme arrogance into a sanctuary for the people who actually kept this city running. I set the pen down. The sun was beginning to set over the skyline, casting a warm, golden light across the empty lounge. I had started with a small, drafty walk-up apartment, and I had built an empire in the shadows. Now, stepping into the light, I was exactly who they said I could never be, and I had never felt more at home. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to support you, don't waste your breath trying to convince them of your worth. Build your empire in silence, and let your success do the talking. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family to find your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories of quiet resilience and ultimate vindication.